The first time my husband told me my voice was too much for the room, I let it go. 3 weeks later, I stopped talking to him completely. And by the time I opened my mouth again, I was holding a piece of paper that would end everything he thought he understood about our marriage. You talk like the room owes you an audience. Desmond said it over dessert, in front of my sister, in front of his own mother, at my 33rd birthday dinner, while I was in the middle of telling a story about a customer who'd tried to return a cake because it was, in her words, too delicious to finish. It got a laugh. It always got a laugh. That was the point of the story. Desmond didn't laugh. He set his fork down against the plate, hard enough that Corinne, his mother, glanced up from her wine. Nobody at that table said anything. My sister Tess reached for the breadbasket like it required her full attention. I felt my face do something I couldn't control. A kind of heat that starts in your chest and climbs. I finished the story anyway, because I'd started it, and because stopping would have meant admitting he'd landed the hit exactly where he'd aimed it. It took me 4 more months to understand that sentence properly. It was never really about the cake story or any one story. For 6 years, I'd been the one who filled rooms. And somewhere in there, Desmond had started treating that as a debt he never agreed to pay. I didn't cry that night. I drove home with him in a silence that felt almost peaceful compared to what came after, and I told myself he'd had a rough week at the dealership, that his numbers were down, that people say sharp things when they're tired. It was easy to reach for, though. I'd been reaching for versions of it for years, without noticing the pattern forming underneath. It kept happening, smaller each time, which somehow made it worse. I'd start telling him about a phone call at work, and he'd check the time on the microwave. I'd laugh at something on my phone and turn the screen toward him, the way you do when you want someone to feel what you're feeling. And he'd look at it the way you'd look at a receipt you didn't ask for. 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, I stopped offering, not all at once, and not as a plan at first. It started as simple self-preservation, the way you stop touching a stove once it's burned you enough times. I answered in single words. I let silences sit instead of filling them. And within about 10 days, I noticed something that scared me more than anything Desmond had ever said out loud. He seemed relieved. He hummed doing dishes. He watched his shows with the volume up 2 notches, undisturbed. He had no idea that what looked like me shrinking was actually me watching, closely, for the first time in years, instead of performing gratitude for scraps of his attention. If you've ever gone quiet around someone and realized, with a small cold shock, that quiet was exactly what they'd been asking for all along, you already know where this is going. To understand what I was watching for, you have to understand how we got a house on Larkspur Court with both our names on the mailbox and only one name on the deed, and why that one name would end up mattering more than either of us understood on the day we bought it. My father, Harold Voss, ran a small print shop in Ohio for 32 years before a stroke took him 3 days before my 27th birthday. He left me most of what he had because my mother had died young and there was no one else standing in line. His lawyer, a meticulous woman named Priya Anand, told me something across her desk that I didn't understand the weight of for years. Buy the house in your name only, she said. It doesn't matter how much you trust him. Your father worked 3 decades for this. Protect it like he would have. I used most of it as a down payment 18 months before Desmond and I married. He knew. He said at the time that a house was just a house, that the name on a piece of paper didn't mean anything between people who loved each other. I believed him mostly, until a dinner party 2 years into the marriage when someone mentioned property values, and Desmond, 3 drinks in, laughed and said, "Ask Nora. It's her house. I just pay to keep the lights on. The table went quiet, the way tables do when a joke isn't really a joke. I smiled through it, because that's what you do. I remember exactly where I was standing when he said it, by the sink, holding a dish towel, and I remember thinking, clearly, that's not humor. That's a resentment wearing a costume. I filed it away instead of examining it. I've since learned that's what most of us do with the moments that matter most. There was one earlier warning I understand differently now. Second year of the marriage, I asked him gently over dinner why his half of the shared expenses kept arriving late. Fair question, soft tone. He went pale before I'd finished the sentence, pressed a hand to his chest, told me his heart was racing, that he needed me to stop talking about money right now, because he thought something was actually wrong with him. I spent 40 minutes on the bathroom floor with him, checking his pulse against mine, terrified. Nothing was wrong. By morning he was cheerful, and the conversation about the money never came up again. Not that week, not that year. I didn't have language for what that was at the time. I do now. It's a specific kind of leverage, using someone's fear for your body to end a conversation you don't want to survive. I don't think he did it on purpose that first time. I think he discovered, almost by accident, that it worked. And once a person discovers that, they rarely need to use the exact same trick twice to keep the door closed. They just need you to remember how it felt the first time. By the December I'm telling you about, we'd been married 6 years, and I'd started driving to Tessa's apartment most evenings at 7, sitting on her fire escape wrapped in a blanket, talking about everything I wasn't allowed to bring home anymore. She watched me with the patience of someone who'd already survived her own version of this. "You know this isn't sustainable," she said one night. I told her it wasn't supposed to be sustainable. It was supposed to be a mirror. 3 weeks into my quiet, Desmond needed something from me. His dealership was courting a fleet contract with a regional logistics company, and there was a client dinner, spouses invited, at a steakhouse downtown. He left a note on the counter that morning, an actual typed note, the kind of small detail that would almost be funny if it weren't so telling, instructing me to wear the blue dress. 7 o'clock, don't be late. I wore the dress. I sat through cocktails, asking a soft-spoken client named Warren about his grandkids, smiling in all the right places, and then, over the entree, Desmond's boss turned the conversation to a trip we'd taken to Tulum, the one with the storm. Desmond turned to me on reflex, the way he always did when a story needed finishing. The way I'd supplied the color and the punchline for 6 years of dinners, exactly like that one. I met his eyes. I sipped my water. I let the silence stretch long enough that I counted it. His smile cracked at the corner, small enough that no one else caught it. But I'd been married to that face for 6 years, and I knew exactly what a crack in it looked like. He fumbled through the rest of the story alone, mixed up a name, sweated through his shirt by dessert. In the car afterward, he was furious in that specific way men get furious when they've been embarrassed in front of someone whose opinion touches their paycheck. "You made me look like an idiot in front of Marcus," he said, gripping the wheel. "I gave you exactly what you asked for," I told him. No noise. He didn't have an answer for that. 2 days later, he escalated in a way I hadn't seen coming. I found out my card had been declined at the grocery store. Cart full, teenage cashier wincing on my behalf. A stranger behind me quietly offering to cover the difference. I told her I was fine, left the cart, walked out into the parking lot with nothing but my purse and a feeling that surprised me. Not humiliation, exactly. Something colder. Clarity. He'd made a calculation. He'd decided a public inconvenience was a fair price for getting his wife back under control. A bank representative confirmed it an hour later. Desmond had removed my name from the shared card that morning. The logic was simple enough to hate. Cut off the noise's comfort, and the noise comes crawling back to the quiet room where it belongs. I didn't crawl anywhere. I drove home, opened a checking account at a credit union across town that Desmond had never heard of, because I'd found it through a coworker instead of him, and I moved half of what sat in our joint savings into it, $38,000 to the dollar. I left a printed spreadsheet on the counter that night. No note, just an itemized list of 3 months of his spending. Golf memberships. Bar tabs with his boss at a place called The Corridor. The math spoke for itself. He read it the next morning at the counter, jaw working, coffee going cold in his hand, and never said a single word to me about it. If you've ever watched someone read proof of their own choices laid out in black and white and just quietly fold the page instead of saying anything, you know exactly the silence I'm describing. 2 nights later, the heater died at 3 a.m. A mechanical scream from the basement followed by a silence that was somehow louder. By 6, the house had dropped to 51 degrees. Desmond stood in the kitchen in his coat, demanding I call someone. I'm not the project manager of this house anymore, I told him. The first full sentence I'd spoken to him in 19 days. You made that decision back at my birthday dinner. I'm just a resident here now, same as you. He called a repair company he found on a flyer and got quoted $3,400 he couldn't touch because he'd locked the shared card and, in his fury, locked himself out of easy cash right along with me. He knocked on the guest room door that night and asked, voice stripped of its usual command, whether I'd put it on my own card. I don't authorize household expenses on a private account, I said. You'll have to find another way. I heard him on the phone with Corinne an hour later, low and wounded through the wall, telling her the bank had frozen his account by mistake, that I was being difficult about covering the gap. She wired him $2,200 by morning. I saw the confirmation open on his phone on the counter when I went for coffee, and something in me went very still, the way weather goes still right before it turns. His brother Wade showed up 2 days later, unannounced, carrying 2 coffees and a look I hadn't seen on him since our wedding toast. Corinne had called him, worried. He sat at the kitchen island while Desmond showered and asked me plainly how long we'd been living like this. I told him about the birthday dinner, the notes on the counter, the 19 days. He listened with his coffee going cold, untouched, the exact way his mother's had. When Desmond came downstairs, Wade didn't soften a thing. You built this, he told his brother, right there in the kitchen. You built the exact trap you're standing in, and now you want everyone to feel sorry for you. Mom sent you money on a lie, Desmond. On a lie you told her. Desmond had no comeback. I'd never once seen him without one before. I want to be clear that I didn't feel triumphant watching that. I felt something closer to grief for whoever he might have been if he'd never learned that fear and money could stand in for honesty. That feeling didn't last long. The professional consequences arrived that same week. Marcus quietly pulled him off the fleet account he'd spent 8 months chasing, telling someone in the break room, according to what Wade heard secondhand, that Desmond seemed unfocused, not the face you put in front of a client that size. Desmond came home Thursday, carrying a box from his desk, and stood in the hallway with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Not anger. Something closer to grief. Are you satisfied? He asked. You broke me. You broke yourself, I told him. I just stopped covering for it. 2 mornings later, a typed memo appeared on the counter. formatted like a corporate document, informing me that effective the 1st of the month, he'd be taking over the guest room I'd been sleeping in. 14 days to vacate or make other arrangements. Other arrangements in my own house. I photographed both pages and sent them straight to Priya, my father's old attorney, who'd handled family cases in the years since. She called instead of emailing, which told me something before she said a word. She'd pulled the county property records that afternoon as standard practice, and something in the history had made her look further. A title inquiry had been opened 6 weeks earlier, the kind a lender runs before approving a loan against a property. There was a second envelope on the same stack of mail I'd been ignoring for 2 weeks, addressed to both of us, from a lender I didn't recognize. I'd assumed it was junk. I opened it that night with a butter knife, hands steadier than I expected. Inside was a denial letter, dated 3 weeks earlier, for a business loan application in Desmond's name against the Larkspur Court property. The down payment for a share in a used car lot he and Wade had been quietly discussing for months. The application listed my income at a figure $40,000 higher than what I actually made, and it had been denied for exactly one reason: title discrepancy. Sole ownership does not match co-borrower application. I read that line twice before I understood what I was holding. Desmond had tried to borrow against my father's money using numbers he'd invented, betting that a loan officer wouldn't check the deed closely enough to notice whose name was actually on it. The bet had failed. I understood something then that 6 years of marriage hadn't let me see clearly until that exact moment. My voice was never too loud. My voice was a life with a piece of it he couldn't touch: my father's money, sitting exactly where my father had put it, no matter how charming Desmond made himself at other people's dinner tables. I didn't confront him that night. I waited 3 days, until Priya had drafted a response and Corinne had already planned a Sunday visit to return a casserole dish. Wade came with her, uninvited by anyone but his own instincts. I set both documents on the table before they arrived: the memo, the denial letter, the inflated number circled in red. Desmond came into the kitchen first, saw the papers, went very still. "What is this?" he said. "Sit down," I told him. "Your mother's on her way, and I'd like her to hear it from me." Corinne's face moved through 3 stages in about 4 seconds when she stepped into that kitchen. Confusion, disbelief, something that looked like grief for a version of her son she'd apparently believed still existed. "Ask him why he told you the bank froze his account by mistake," I said, keeping my voice level. "He told you that so you'd wire him money. The truth is, I removed him from a shared card after 6 years of him deciding my voice was an inconvenience he could switch off whenever it suited him." Desmond didn't lie to her face a second time. I think that surprised me more than anything else that afternoon. "I was going to pay you back," he said. "To Corinne, not to me. It wasn't supposed to be a big thing. It's an $80,000 big thing," I said, and slid the letter toward her. He tried to borrow against a house my father spent 32 years earning, using my name, my income, a number I never signed off on. It's never had his name on it. He's known that since the week we closed. Wade read it twice, the same way I had, and when he looked up, something had hardened in his face. "You tried to take a loan on her father's house," he said, slowly, behind her back. "And when it didn't work, you tried to kick her out of the guest room instead." Desmond reached for the version of the story that had worked on me for 6 years. The pressure, the dealership, the bills, me being checked out for weeks. I repeated one line back to him, and I felt something in my chest go very calm. the way it had the night of the towel. You told me my voice was too much for the room. I stopped talking. That's not a mystery. That's cause and effect. You don't get to build the fire and then ask everyone watching to admire how hard you're working to put it out. Nobody said anything for a long moment. Corinne had tears in her eyes. Not for me, I think, but for the sun she was finally seeing clearly. Wade set the letter down carefully, put a hand on his mother's shoulder, and told Desmond, quietly, to fix it, actually fix it, before he called him again. I filed 12 days later. I thought that would be the hardest part. It wasn't. Desmond had one more move left in him, and he waited until the paperwork was almost final to make it. Because the house was solely mine, it wasn't subject to division, which felt strange to hear confirmed out loud in a mediation room months later, across the table from Desmond and his own tired-looking attorney, who didn't fight that point very hard. The joint savings split by formula. The credit card debt became his alone. The loan application never became a criminal matter, but it lived permanently in the record as evidence of the pattern, and nobody in that room needed much help interpreting what it meant. Desmond showed up at the house once more, 3 weeks before mediation, unannounced, a little unsteady, standing on the porch without a coat, asking to really talk the way we used to. I'm asking you not to do this, he said. I'll go to counseling. Just don't let the loan part follow me at work. There it was finally, the actual reason for the porch, not the marriage. The consequence. That isn't about punishing you, I told him. It's about telling the truth to people who have a right to it. You made that choice weeks before I ever opened an envelope. I just stopped covering the math. He asked if I still loved him. I loved the man who used to call me, just to hear my voice on his drive home, I said. I don't know where he went. I don't think you do either. It's late July now, 7 months since the birthday dinner. I still live on Larkspur Court, though alone doesn't feel like quite the right word for it anymore. Tess comes by most weekends. Wade texts me pictures of his garden, competitive about it in a way that makes me laugh, since he knows I've started growing tomatoes in the side yard myself. Corinne still calls, careful, a little sad, but real. I started seeing a therapist in February, a quiet man named Dr. Ansari, who asked me once why I'd stayed so long documenting things on a notepad instead of simply leaving. I didn't have a clean answer that day. I've built one since. I stayed because some stubborn part of me needed to prove my father's money had bought me a house, not a marriage I'd have to defend forever. I understand now those two things were never actually in conflict. I could grieve what the marriage was supposed to be and still be grateful for the wall it taught me to build around what he left me. I think about that dinner table a lot, honestly, not with anger anymore, or not only with anger. He told me I talked like the room owed me an audience, and for exactly as long as it took me to notice the pattern, I believe the problem might genuinely be me. Every word I said in that house was proof I existed as a full person in it, with a father who'd left me something no one could quietly take, and a mind that didn't need his permission to have thoughts in it. I got an email from him in June. Careful, unprompted, no direct apology, but the shape of one trying to exist underneath the sentences. I wrote back 3 lines. I hope the therapy helps. I hope you build something honest with whoever comes next. I'm not angry anymore. And I'm also not going to be a character in your recovery story. People who know the whole arc sometimes ask if I regret the silence, the notepad, the drive to a credit union he'd never heard of. I don't. There are moments in a relationship where the only sentence left that still means anything is the one you say by not saying anything at all. Desmond spent 6 years telling me my voice was too much for the room he wanted to control. He was almost right about one thing. It was his room once, built on the assumption I'd always make myself smaller to fit inside it. I don't live in that room anymore. I built a quieter one, and every wall in it has my name on the deed, and every voice in it, including mine, is finally allowed to fill the whole space. That's the whole story. Thanks for listening.